The day after my grandfather's funeral, I sat in a quiet lawyer's office with the rest of my family. The room smelled like old paper and coffee. Everything felt heavy and silent. My name is Emily Hayes. I'm 29 years old, and for the last 2 years I had been taking care of my grandfather, Robert Hayes, while his health slowly got worse. Across the table from me sat the rest of the family. My uncle, Richard Hayes, looked calm and confident as always. He was a successful property developer who always seemed to be thinking about business deals. Next to him sat his daughter, my cousin Jessica, who worked in luxury real estate and dressed like she had just stepped out of a magazine. Beside me was my mother, Karen, who kept her eyes down most of the time and avoided looking at anyone. Everyone was dressed in black. Everyone acted sad. But something felt wrong. I could feel a strange tension in the room, like everyone was waiting for something. My grandfather had always told me the same thing again and again during the last few years. The lake house will always be yours, Emily. You're the only one who understands why it matters. That house wasn't just a building. It was my childhood. After my father died when I was 14, I spent most of my time there with Grandpa. He taught me how to fish on the quiet lake in the morning. He showed me how to fix small engines in the old workshop. We would sit on the dock and watch the sunset while he told stories about our family. That place meant everything to me. The lawyer finally opened a folder on the desk and adjusted his glasses. "Thank you all for coming," he said politely. "We will now read the final will of Robert Hayes." My hands were folded tightly in my lap. I wasn't nervous. I already knew what Grandpa wanted. Or at least I thought I did. The lawyer began reading the document slowly. At first it was normal things, small donations, personal items. Then he reached the section about the estate. And suddenly my stomach dropped. "According to this will," the lawyer said, "the full Hayes estate, including the lake house property, will be transferred to Richard Hayes and his daughter, Jessica Hayes." For a moment, I thought I had heard him wrong. My ears were ringing. The lake house, to Richard and Jessica? That couldn't be right. Then the lawyer continued. "Emily Hayes will receive $1,000 and a box of family keepsakes." The room became completely silent. I slowly looked up. Jessica had a small smile on her face, like she was trying to hide it but couldn't. My Uncle Richard simply nodded calmly and said, "Thank you," to the lawyer. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my chest. This wasn't possible. 2 weeks ago, my grandfather had called me to the lake house. We sat together in the living room, and he showed me his will himself. I remembered the moment clearly. In that will, the lake house belonged to me. I looked around the room again. Richard and Jessica exchanged a quick glance. My mother stayed quiet, staring at the table. They all looked satisfied. Like everything had gone exactly the way they expected. They thought this was the end. They thought I would quietly accept it and walk away. But they didn't know something. Inside my purse was a folded document my grandfather had given me that day. A photocopy of his original will. My fingers slowly moved toward my bag. Because in that copy, the lake house didn't belong to Richard. It belonged to me. And in that moment, a terrifying thought entered my mind. Someone in my own family had changed my grandfather's will after he died. Growing up, my life was very different from the rest of my family. Most of the Hayes family cared about money, business, and success. My Uncle Richard built a large property company and became very wealthy. My cousin Jessica followed the same path and worked in luxury real estate, selling expensive houses to rich clients. But I was never interested in that world. I chose a much simpler life. I became a nurse and worked at a local hospital. The job was not glamorous, and it didn't make me rich, but I loved helping people. For me, family and kindness mattered more than money. The most important person in my life was my grandfather, Robert Hayes. When I was 14, my father died in a terrible car accident. It was the hardest time in my life. My mother was heartbroken and distant, and our home felt empty. But my grandfather stepped in and became my biggest support. He started inviting me to the lake house almost every weekend. That place slowly became my second home. Grandpa believed in teaching things with patience. He showed me how to fish early in the morning when the lake was quiet and the air was cold. He taught me how to repair small engines in the old workshop behind the house. Sometimes we would sit together on the wooden dock and watch the sunset while he told stories about our family history. Those were the moments that shaped my life. To my grandfather, the lake house was never just property. It was where our family memories lived. It was the place where he raised his children, and where he hoped future generations would gather. But not everyone in the family felt the same way. My Uncle Richard had very different priorities. He was a successful property developer, and he always looked at land as an opportunity to make money. The lake house sat on beautiful land near the water, and Richard believed it could be sold to a resort company for millions of dollars. For years, he tried to convince Grandpa to sell it. Every time they discussed it, the conversations ended in quiet arguments. Grandpa always refused. "This house is family history," he once told me. "It's not a business deal." Many times he said something else too. "Emily understands this place. One day it will belong to her." Those words made Richard unhappy, even if he never said it directly. Jessica, his daughter, agreed with him. She also believed the land should be sold. From her point of view, keeping such valuable property just for memories made no sense. My mother, Karen, usually stayed quiet whenever the topic came up. She hated conflict and always tried to stay neutral. But the tension was always there, just under the surface. About 6 months before Grandpa died, his health started getting worse. He became weaker and needed more care. That was when I started spending even more time helping him. Around that same time, something changed. Uncle Richard suddenly began visiting him very often. At first, I thought it was a good thing. I believed he was trying to reconnect with his father while he still had time. But now, thinking back, something about those visits feels strange. Richard always came alone. Sometimes they spoke behind closed doors for long periods of time. When I asked Grandpa about it, he would simply say they were discussing family matters. 2 weeks before Grandpa passed away, he called me to the lake house one afternoon. The house was quiet, and the lake outside looked peaceful. Grandpa sat in his chair near the window with a folder in his hands. He asked me to sit beside him. Then he handed me a document. It was a copy of his will. I remember being confused. I told him he didn't need to show me something like that, but he insisted. Then he said something that felt strange at the time. Sometimes people show their true colors when money gets involved. I didn't fully understand what he meant then. But now, I'm starting to. Back in the lawyer's office, the silence did not last very long. As soon as the will reading ended, Uncle Richard leaned back in his chair like everything had already been decided. He looked relaxed, almost satisfied. It was like he had been expecting this result the whole time. "Well," he said calmly, "we should begin discussing the next steps for the lake property." My chest tightened when I heard those words. Jessica immediately leaned forward with excitement. "I already spoke with a few developers last year," she said. "They were very interested in the land. If we move quickly, we could sell it for a huge amount." They were talking about the lake house like it was just another business deal. Like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the place where my grandfather had spent most of his life. Like it wasn't the place where I grew up after my father died. I sat there quietly while they spoke, feeling invisible. The lawyer closed the folder containing the will and began explaining the legal steps for transferring the property and other assets. Richard nodded as if everything was simple and already settled. But something inside me would not stay quiet. My hands felt cold as I slowly raised one of them. "Excuse me," I said softly. The lawyer looked up. "Yes, Emily?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "When exactly was this will signed?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses and looked down at the document again. "It was signed 3 days before Robert Hayes passed away," he said. My body suddenly went still. 3 days before Grandpa died? That didn't make sense. 3 days before his death, he was already in the hospital. I had been there almost every day. He was weak, tired, and barely able to speak. I swallowed slowly. "Can you tell me who witnessed the signing?" I asked. The lawyer looked again at the document. "The witness listed here is..." He paused for a moment before reading the name. It was a name I had never heard before. I frowned. "I don't recognize that name," I said. The lawyer shrugged slightly. "Sometimes witnesses are friends, colleagues, or legal assistants." But one important detail suddenly became very clear in my mind. During that time in the hospital, only one family member had been visiting Grandpa regularly. Uncle Richard. My heart began beating faster. A terrible thought started forming in my mind. What if my uncle had done something to change the will? What if he had convinced Grandpa to sign something when he was too weak to understand? Or worse, what if the will was not real at all? Before I could speak again, Richard suddenly sounded annoyed. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "Emily, you're creating unnecessary drama. The will has already been read." Jessica crossed her arms. "Yeah," she added. "You're acting like someone committed a crime." I took a slow breath. Maybe they expected me to stay quiet. Maybe they thought I would just accept everything and leave. But they didn't know what was inside my purse. Without saying anything, I reached down and opened my bag. My fingers found the folded document that had been sitting there since the funeral. I carefully pulled it out and placed it on the table in front of the lawyer. "This," I said quietly, "is a copy of the will my grandfather showed me 2 weeks before he died." The room became silent again. The lawyer picked up the paper and began reading it carefully. Seconds passed. Then his expression slowly changed. His eyebrows lifted slightly as he continued reading. No one spoke. Finally, he looked up from the document, and the room suddenly felt very different. Because in this version of the will, the lake house did not belong to Richard. It clearly belonged to me, Emily Hayes. For the first time since we entered the room, I saw something new on my uncle's face. Nervousness. The tension in the lawyer's office grew quickly. Richard immediately leaned forward, his voice sharp. "That copy is fake, Emily. Your grandfather never gave you that. You're trying to cause trouble." Jessica didn't hold back either. "Yeah, Emily. Are you trying to get attention? Forging a will now?" Her words stung, and I could feel the room closing in around me. Even my mother, Karen, spoke softly but firmly. "Emily, maybe you should just let it go. This could turn into a long legal fight. It's not worth it." I looked at them all. The faces I thought I could trust were now full of doubt and suspicion. But I couldn't let it go. I knew my grandfather had trusted me. I knew the lake house was meant for me. The lawyer finally spoke. "Challenging a will is not simple. It could take months or even years in court, and the cost can be very high." Richard smiled, a cold, confident smile. "You can't afford a fight like this, Emily. You know it. Give it up now, and you won't ruin relationships with the family." I felt alone. Every member of my family was turning against me. They looked at me like I was the problem, the one causing pain and tension. But I remembered something Grandpa had once said years ago, in a quiet conversation at the lake house. Sometimes, when things get complicated, you need someone who knows the law. Michael Grant. He's retired now, but he was always careful with families like ours. I didn't waste time. I tracked down Michael Grant, the retired estate lawyer. His office smelled of old books and polished wood. He was calm and professional. And after I explained everything, he carefully examined both versions of the will. As he studied them, he frowned. "There are several things that don't look right," he said slowly. "The signature on this newer will looks rushed. The witness listed here, I've never heard of him. And the timing doesn't make sense. Your grandfather was barely able to speak when this was supposedly signed." Michael's words gave me hope, but we both knew suspicion wasn't enough. We needed proof. Meanwhile, Richard's attacks became more direct. He started calling me almost every day, offering money to drop the challenge. He tried to make me scared of the legal costs and the potential court battles. Jessica joined in her own way. She whispered to people in the family, spreading rumors that I was greedy and only thinking of myself. I began to doubt myself for the first time in months. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe they were right. But then Michael made an important discovery. "The hospital where your grandfather stayed," he said, "had security cameras in the hallways. If the will was really signed with a witness present, the cameras should have recorded it." My heart raced. That could be the proof we needed. We requested the security footage, and when it arrived, it was shocking. The video showed Richard walking into Grandpa's hospital room carrying documents. No one else followed him. The witness never appeared. Richard left alone with papers in his hands. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and relief. This was the proof we needed. This was the moment when I realized I might really win back what my grandfather had promised me. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. The day of the court hearing arrived, and the courtroom was packed. I felt my hands trembling slightly, but I held my head high. Months of fear, doubt, and tension had led to this moment. Richard sat confidently at the front with his lawyers. They looked certain of their victory. The lawyer representing him stood and spoke first, presenting the new will as the final legal document. "This will," Richard's lawyer said, "shows that Robert Hayes changed his mind. He believed Emily was not ready to handle such a large inheritance. She is emotionally unstable and financially inexperienced. The lake house should go to Richard Hayes and his daughter Jessica." I swallowed hard, trying to stay calm. Everything felt heavy, like the room itself was pressing down on me. Then Michael Grant stood. He looked steady, confident. He addressed the judge clearly and calmly. "Your Honor," Michael said, "we have video evidence from the hospital where Robert Hayes stayed. The footage shows Richard Hayes entering his father's room with documents. But no witness ever enters. Richard leaves alone with papers." The judge leaned forward. The room went silent. Everyone's eyes were on the screen as Michael played the video. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the proof I had been hoping for. The tension in the courtroom was almost unbearable. Richard shifted in his seat. His confident expression began to falter. Jessica's eyes widened, disbelief written all over her face. She had never suspected her father could do something like this. Michael wasn't done. He continued, holding up the documents. "There is something even more shocking," he said. "The witness named on this will, he is listed as having been present during the signing, has been dead for over 2 years. That signature is a forgery." The courtroom gasped. Even the judge's mouth opened slightly in surprise. The murmurs filled the room, growing louder by the second. Richard's face turned pale. Jessica covered her mouth with her hand. She looked at her father, horrified. "Dad, you did this?" she whispered, almost to herself. The judge called for silence. Then he addressed Richard directly. "Mr. Hayes, how do you respond to these allegations? This will appears to have been forged, and the witness never existed." Richard's face was tight, and his voice shaky. I, he stammered. He tried to speak, but the weight of the evidence was too strong. The judge looked at him carefully and then at the court clerk. "This forged will is hereby dismissed. The original will of Robert Hayes is reinstated." My chest tightened as relief and joy washed over me. The lake house, the place my grandfather had promised me, the place that held so many memories, legally belonged to me. Richard was silent, defeated, as the reality sank in. I could see the fear and panic in his eyes. He now faced serious legal trouble for fraud and forgery. Jessica, still in shock, looked at me. There was no anger, only disbelief and sorrow that her father had betrayed the family in such a way. The judge's gavel struck the desk. The room settled into quiet. I finally allowed myself to breathe. Months of uncertainty, pain, and fear were over. The truth had won. Justice had been served. For the first time in a long while I felt calm. I felt strong. I had kept my grandfather's promise. And I knew deep inside that he would have been proud of me. Months passed, and life began to feel different. The tension that had filled the family for so long slowly started to fade, but things were not the same as before. Richard stayed away from family gatherings. The legal investigations against him were ongoing, and he had become almost invisible. I didn't miss him. The thought of him no longer controlling the lake house was a relief in itself. Jessica eventually came to see me. She looked nervous, unsure of how to begin. "Emily," she said softly, "I am sorry. I trusted my father blindly. I didn't know he would do something like this." I looked at her and saw her genuine regret. I nodded slowly. "I forgive you," I said. "But we need time. Things have changed between us, and it will take time to rebuild trust." My mother, Karen, also began to open up again. She had avoided conflict for so long that she had let Richard's actions affect her judgment. But after the court case, she slowly realized how wrong she had been to doubt me. She spent time visiting me at the lake house, talking and laughing quietly. We began to rebuild our relationship, step by step. And then there was the house itself. My grandfather's lake house, the place filled with so many memories, finally became mine to care for. The first thing I did was walk along the dock. It was old, the boards creaking under my feet, but it felt like home. I spent days repairing it, sanding the wood, and making it strong again. Next, I went to the old boat shed. It was dusty and falling apart, but I cleaned it, fixed the broken hinges, and restored it little by little. Every corner of the house reminded me of Grandpa, his stories, his patience, the way he had taught me to take care of things. For the first time in years, the lake house felt peaceful again. It was quiet, safe, and mine. I could sit on the dock in the evenings and watch the sun set over the water, just like I had as a child with Grandpa. And slowly, I began to understand something important. My grandfather hadn't just left me a house. He had left me a responsibility. He had trusted me to protect the truth, to stand up for what was right, and to carry forward the family values he held dear. It wasn't about the property or the money. It was about honesty, courage, and care. The house was a symbol of everything he believed in. By fighting for it, I had honored his memory in the only way that truly mattered. Every day I spent at the lake house, I felt that trust in my heart. I realized that my grandfather had chosen me not because I was rich or powerful, but because I valued the things he valued most. I had proven to myself, and to my family, that I could protect what mattered. And for the first time, I felt completely at peace. I was no longer just Emily Hayes, the quiet nurse who cared for her grandfather. I was the person he had trusted, the one who had fought for the truth, and the one who would carry forward his legacy. The lake house was more than a building. It was hope, memories, and family. And now it was finally home. One evening, I sat alone on the dock, watching the sun slowly sink behind the trees across the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the orange and pink sky. I took a deep breath, feeling the quiet around me, the peace I hadn't felt in months. Curious, I went into the old workshop behind the house. Among the tools and boxes, I found a small wooden box that Grandpa had clearly hidden. My hands shook a little as I opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper, a handwritten note in Grandpa's familiar script. I read the words slowly. This house doesn't belong to the person who wants it the most. It belongs to the one who respects it enough to fight for it. I smiled quietly. The words felt like Grandpa was there with me, explaining everything I had gone through. I finally understood why he had trusted me with the lake house. It wasn't because I was rich or because I had chased success. It was because I had loved the house, respected it, and never treated it as just money. I thought about the long fight, the doubts, and the moments I had almost given up. Every step I had taken to protect the truth, every moment I had stood up to my family, had led me here. Grandpa had believed I was the right person to care for the house, and now I knew he was right. The sun disappeared completely behind the trees, leaving the lake glowing with the last light of the day. I felt a warmth inside me I hadn't felt since the funeral. Calm, complete, and certain. I had protected the one thing my grandfather truly cared about. The lake house was more than wood and land. It was memories, love, and family. And now it was safe. I leaned back on the dock, letting the gentle breeze touch my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Grandpa's trust, his lessons, and his love were with me. And I knew without a doubt that I had honored him the right way.